Hey guys, Touch coming at you. Getting a little gray outside, Saturday afternoon. Plane up in the sky. Anyway, hopefully it's not going to rain because the car's outside, top's down, and I'd have to move quite a bit of stuff in the garage to be able to scramble to get the car in there, so hopefully this passes. Anyway, I wanted to make a quick video for Colin Clark. You know, Colin's doing a TR3A restoration like myself, and Colin asked me to do or asked him to give him a response on the primers that I'm using in order to get the car ready for paint. So what I thought I'd do is I'd show Colin and whoever else wants to watch this what products I'm actually using in order to get the car to that stage. So what we'll do is, like I said, I've got the cans on display. We'll just take a quick break and we'll wander over there and I'll walk you through the products that I have. Okay guys, so these are the products I've decided to use on my project. Now obviously some people will have a different process, but this is what I've decided to do. So the first step for me in most cases would be the self-etching primer, and as you can see I'm using the MP550 from Matrix. It's this buff colored or rose colored primer that you see here. It's a direct to metal product, and that's generally the first step I've been using prior to using the epoxy primer. And as you can see, I've got a Matrix epoxy primer in white. It's the MP450 that I've been using. So those are two of the items that I'm using. I don't have the can left from the other product I was using, which is the polyester primer. I actually need to get another can. That was the Feather-Filled G2, and again, that's a polyester primer, and that's what you see here on this fender, and all of these panels, with the exception of the one fender, have been done with a polyester primer and block sanded. The final primer that I'm going to be using is the urethane primer, which is also from Evercoat. It's called Eurofill 2.1. The final step before getting ready to paint will be priming with the urethane primer and then block sanding to either 400 or 600 grit. Haven't got to that decision yet. Anyway, so those are the products I'm using, and the next item will be to tell you how I use these products on my project. Okay, so I was trying to structure a response not to confuse anyone, but so here's what I do. And it's not always the same order that I use those products. And I'll try to give you examples along the way. So, let's start with the hood. The hood and the trunk lid were, I think, the straightest panel on this car, or straightest panels on these cars. So, what I decided to do was I decided to strip the hood down to bare metal. Once it was at bare metal, I then sprayed that with the self-etching primer. The entire panel was self-etching primer. And then I sprayed on top of that with the epoxy primer to cover. And then I followed that with the polyester primer, which is now blocked out to 180 grit. Now, the reason I did that, like I said, I thought this panel would be fairly straight, and in some regards I was pretty much right. There's a few spots that need some work that I found out after block sanding, but all in all it's not too bad. You can actually see the layers here. You can actually see a little bit of bare metal, and then you can see the self-etching primer, then you can see the epoxy primer, and then finally you can see the polyester primer. Now, that's the order of product usage on that panel, because I thought that, like I said, was in pretty good shape. In some cases, you'll see that I've actually decided to do my bodywork first. This panel I knew was quite rough, so what I decided to do on this panel was I decided to do my filler work first over the entire panel, and then what I'll do next is I will actually go back at anywhere where it's showing bare metal. I will then use the self-etching primer on the bare metal spots to protect it. Then I will hit the panel with the epoxy primer, and then I'll hit the panel after that with the polyester primer. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, in some cases, if it's a completely bare metal panel, which I don't really have on this car, this little sail panel is probably the closest. You can see I've done some body work here. So obviously there's quite a bit of self-etch on here. Maybe the transmission tunnel is probably the best show of this product. I stripped the transmission tunnel down directly to bare metal and gave that a complete coat of the etching primer. The next step for that would be to go with the epoxy primer, and then the next step after that, you know what, I don't think I'm going to body work the transmission tunnel too much, so I'll probably go directly to the urethane primer in this case and just sand the urethane primer prior to base coat paint. Just one note of caution, it's my understanding that you cannot add self-etching primer to body filler or on top of epoxy primer, so you've got to sort of be careful what you do as far as laying your self-etching primer down. Now some people will actually spray the self-etching primer directly over the bare metal panel, then they'll follow that up with the epoxy primer, and then they'll do their body work on top of the epoxy primer. I think you have to sand the repair area with 80 grit in order to do that, but in some cases you can do that as well. Like I said, I was finding that for my repair spots with the epoxy primer, if I did that sort of order, I was having to sand pretty much down to the metal anyway to get the repair done, so I thought it would be better just to, in this case, with these panels, I would go directly to metal with my repair work before I put the epoxy on. So hopefully I haven't confused you too much, but that's really the order of process that I've been following for my repairs and my restoration. And if you have any questions, let me know. Talk to you later, guys. Oh, I guess I should mention as to why I decided to go with those 4 different primers. So the etching primer really is a requirement of the matrix products that I'm using. It tells me that for anything larger than, I think it's larger than a quarter bare metal showing, you need to actually prime it with self-etching primer before you go to epoxy primer. So that's really what this, the self-etching primer is for, corrosion resistance. Then the epoxy primer is just really to seal the whole body shell in or the panels in. The polyester primer I've been using as sort of a novice bodyman's helper. Polyester primer is basically sprayable body filler, and it helps you get the panels a little straighter. This car, like, it was pretty rough shape, so I could use all the help I can get. So that's why I went with the polyester primer in order to get these panels a little straighter. And then the acrylic urethane primer, which is the Eurofill, that will be my final primer that I'm going to use over. You know, I've got to make some repairs on this. We know where I've block sanded and I've got some low spots. I'll be doing some body filler over there. So once that's done, I'll need to primer over that, and I've decided to go with the urethane primer over top of that, and we'll block that down in order to get the car ready for paint. Now, my understanding is you could actually go from the polyester primer directly to paint, but you know, I'd rather just go with the urethane primer. All right, talk to you later. I decided to go with the urethane primer because from what I understand, the urethane primer may sand a little bit easier than the polyester primer. So for my final coat, I wanted something that was easily sandable. And I'm not trying to do a lot of fill on my final coat, so the polyester is a really high build primer. The urethane primer is a little bit lower build. I don't need a high build because I've already blocked the panels out, so that's why I've gone with the urethane. Like I said, for those reasons, and I'll talk to you later.